Hello there, everybody. Welcome along to EFL Debate. This is the Championship podcast. Hope your Wednesday's gone very, very well. This week, we're discussing teams not in the relegation zone or even in the immediacy of the relegation battle, but teams that could potentially drop in. So, Birmingham City and Plymouth Argyle are the obvious teams to discuss. We're also joined by a Blackburn Rovers fan in a few moments' time. A few of those teams that might be looking just over their shoulders. Delighted to be joined by my lovely co-host Oli Mann from the Sheffield United way. Oli, great to have you on after a couple of weeks, after a week's interlude. Just wanted to get your sort of big picture thoughts on the Championship dogfight and the teams just above it, because at the moment you've got Huddersfield Town just outside the relegation zone. Other than that, I'm kind of struggling a little bit to find teams that are going to sort of be sucked in by Sheffield Wednesday, QPR and Rotherham.
Yeah, it's difficult, to be honest. I think there's certainly a situation, or there's a point where you can see Wednesday catching teams up. You can see that they've been performing well. Obviously, they got a really bad result last weekend, but can you judge anybody on going away to Southampton at the moment? I don't think so. I don't think that's fair or reasonable. So we can probably say that I still think Wednesday are going to improve, which puts Huddersfield really in some danger. But you're looking at it, 7 points for Wednesday to catch Birmingham, 8 points for QPR. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the QPR fan from Loft for Words.
I know, it was like you're thinking, could QPR get out of this? And then after like 30 seconds of talking to Clive, you're like, they're doomed.
Yeah, 100% Clive reminded us that QPR are in fact doomed. So I think, for me, the way I'm looking at it right now is that Rotherham and QPR are the teams in trouble. I think Wednesday are still, for me, likely to get out of it. I still think that 4 points isn't enough of a buffer for Huddersfield, but I do think we'll know more by the end of January. I think Huddersfield have got really interesting fixtures between now and the end of January, and basically they have to get a gap. They have to win these games that they've got coming up, home games against the teams around them, an away visit to QPR, of course, QPR, who have got the worst home record in the league. So if Huddersfield can pick up enough points between now and the end of January, and when I say enough, I mean you're probably looking at 6 to 9 that they need to get from their next 3, realistically, then they've got a chance of keeping that gap, staying above Wednesday, and dragging Birmingham, dragging Plymouth into the conversation. Now, the outlier is the guy who's going to join us shortly, and Blackburn. Because I'm sure the last time we had him on, Gab, we sat and we talked to Dan from Rovers Chat. They were talking playoffs. We were thinking, are they an outside shout for the playoffs? Could they make it? That has fallen off a cliff. What's happened to Blackburn?
Well, do you know what? I'm going to stop you there, Ollie, because I think the timing's actually panned out perfectly, because Robert joins us now from Kidder Street Noise podcast on Blackburn Rovers. Good evening, Robert. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How's yourself?
Yeah, really well. Thank you so much for joining us to chat about Blackburn Rovers. Sorry for my squeaky table. I need to get my arms out. I wanted to... I don't know how you feel about it coming on a potential plummeters version of the Championship podcast, because there may be some Blackburn Rovers fans that are a little bit offended by that. But some of the noises coming out of Ewood Park makes me a little bit anxious about Blackburn Rovers, even with what's on paper quite a comfortable 10-point cushion.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think some Rovers fans are of the mindset of, we'll be fine, still 10-point gap. And I think a lot of other Rovers fans are more worried about what's going off the pitch. There's definitely a lot of background noise, whether it's affecting the people, like the players, the manager on the pitch as well. We don't actually know. No one actually knows the mindset of the players. But there is a lot of worrying trends that are happening both on and off the pitch that make a lot of the fan base, that even if it's not this season, it just, like, you can almost imagine if you're having a bad one-off season, you could say, well, we're building for next year, and next year's our chance to push for playoffs and push for promotion. But the worrying thing is for us now is that this season's bad and it can only get worse. So if it doesn't happen this year, it's almost like a certainty next year. So what is the next step for us?
I think that's interesting, because that does So I remember when we talked at the start of the season, Gab, and I said I'd flagged up a concern about Blackburn. I was worried about the noises that were coming out of John Dahl Thomason. I thought some of the players that had left over the summer, and again, I know that Bradley Dack, for example, hadn't played lots of minutes. He's had these injury problems, but it felt as though you were losing a lot of experience and potential leadership in players like him and Diaz, with no replacements obviously coming in. Thomason obviously being really quite unhappy with the way the squad building was going and with the way that he felt the team weren't really being invested in, weren't being built to build on what had been a really successful season for the most part last year. And I had predicted you to finish sort of 19th, 20th. Season started, felt like John Dahl was doing a fantastic job. He'd really got the most out of the team. He'd turned it around, got the positive vibes going. And then I think it's just in recent weeks, isn't it? The last sort of 6 weeks where I think you've lost 5 of your last 6 in the league. What is it that's changed, do you feel, about the squad at that time that's gone from the potentially decent start to us thinking and maybe a push to the playoffs or comfortable mid-table to now and this conversation where we are looking a bit more downwards?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with the word leadership. Obviously, we lost Dom Heyn through injury. He has been put back into the squad recently, not performing very well. He's probably been the most out of form player in recent weeks. Whether that's because he isn't 100% fit yet, but he's had no choice to throw him in because of lack of squad depth, which again comes down to the summer business. We had Ashley Phillips, who's now gone on loan to Plymouth, and people have been raving about him already, his performance at the weekend. So we've also let Lewis Travis go out on loan, who's obviously club captain, big performer for us. I didn't have many qualms about it at first because Tronsad and Wharton that playing that 2 holding midfielder roles have been brilliant. Adam Wharton, we just wax lyrical about him on the podcast all the time. He's a once-in-a-lifetime player for a club like Blackburn Rovers.
Right.
Seriously,
once in a lifetime.
Yeah, generational talent. Like,
right.
And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Blackburn Rovers fan. He's just unbelievable. Like, just plays the game like he's 10 times speed compared to everyone else, who just like walks around the pitch and he sees things that other people don't see. And I think, like Smodic has been brilliant for us this season, scored all the goals, but it's only because of his runs and the passes that Adam Wharton's picking out. And I think even with like a more intelligent striker who, this is no offense to Sammy Smodic, but a more experienced striker that's used to being in them positions or the right positions at the right time, you could be looking at like 20, 30 assists a season. But unfortunately, the players he's got ahead of him are either not good enough or just not experienced enough at this level to get the goal contributions at the end of the passes.
The feeling of Blackburn this season, Robert, seems to be that you've got a lot of strikers, but maybe not that striker that can be that sort of experienced spearhead that maybe you're missing. And I get the impression that maybe Jon Dahl Thomason and the board are a little bit apart in maybe the process forward. Perhaps Jon Dahl Thomason wants that big centre forward to come in, and maybe the board are like, try and develop one of the many strikers that you've got and try and get 1 or 2 back fit. And is there a bit of are they somewhere apart, do you think?
I mean, it depends on like what you value as like a good striker. We always joke about on the podcast that Thomason's probably still the best striker at the club. Can like, even I don't know how old he is, but he like technically probably is still the best one. We've not had a natural finisher, I don't think, since Jordan Rhodes. Danny Graham was good for us, but like to that caliber, everyone says you need a 20, 25 goal season striker, but they're very rare. That's why everyone wants one, because they're very rare to come across. And when you get them, they have one good season where they score 25 goals and then someone else cherry picks them. So you're not really left with a long-term striker like that. In terms of like the things off the pitch, the problem are the wages. I mean, I don't know how much you know about the situation at Blackburn Rovers, but the court proceedings at the minute, where Venky's are only allowed to pay for the wages we've got. So if our wage budget is £8 million a year, they are only allowed to send us £8 million a year. So that leaves no room for transfers or wage increases or like new contracts or anything like that.
Right.
And that's where like the loan signings recently and the transfer dealings haven't really made sense, and it all gets a bit like conspiracy theory and like we start digging rabbit holes and stuff. So it depends how deep you want to get into it, but the problem is just the investment. That's just the thing that's killing our season hopes at the minute.
So in terms of some of that and some of the loans, obviously we've talked about striker options and maybe lacking that player who's going to come in. Obviously there have been some players recruited so far in January, but I'm interested in sort of the impact of things like James Hill. Is it Hall that got recalled back to Bournemouth? Yeah. Hill. I knew it was Hill and then doubted myself. Obviously, he's had quite.
It was like me on the pub quiz last night.
That's exactly it, Gab. Letting his team down again. But obviously, him being recalled by Bournemouth, and then in terms of the players coming back in, there's not been another centre-half brought in to fill that role that he's been sort of trying to play. How big do you see an impact like that? Do you think you will be going out and looking at a centre-back to come in to fill that void?
I honestly couldn't tell you. Honestly, off the top of my head, I could not tell you, because the things that we want to see from the club and the things that we want to see happen is very usually the opposite with Blackburn Rovers at the minute.
Yeah.
We loaned in Andrew Moran from Brighton, who has got potential. I don't think he's ready to play championship level, but it seems at the minute that he's being forced to play that position and he's getting a lot of game time. Now, we have a lot of players at Blackburn Rovers in the academy that are good enough to come through to the first team. And I would rather see us develop a young player, even if they're just like, say, 80%, 90% as good. I would rather see them get game time.
Your academy's really good, isn't it, as well, Robert? Yeah. Probably, I would say, outside the elite, where clubs can afford to spend loads of money on their academies, I think Blackburn Rovers is one of the best in the country.
Yeah, I definitely. I think a lot of Blackburn fans would agree, and we're very proud of the players that we develop. But it's just recently, in recent times, we've had a lot of loans. I think back to Tyler Morton last year, played like over 40 games for us. Adam Morton was down at like 16, 17 appearances, and I was just like when you look at the levels of the ability they've got, I just think there must be something going on in the background. And local journalists asked the questions: is there something in a loan deal? Is there something in a contract? And they just said, no, he's picking him on performances. And
well, do you know what, Robert? Like, maybe last season Tyler Morton might have been fractionally more ready than Adam Wharton, but the trade-off is a full season for Adam Wharton could have meant that his value would have skyrocketed. And actually, if you were able to get a massive offer for Adam Wharton, that sort of thing makes a massive difference to what you're able to do in the transfer market. So it feels like a bit of a false economy when you have got one of the best academies in the country to actually rely as heavily as you do on loans.
See, I don't know how much the cash could be reinvested with the current situation we're in. I don't know. Have I disappeared? Am I still here?
No, I think it's Gab that's had a couple of issues there rather than yourself, Robert.
So yeah, I'm not sure how much cash can be reinvested. Obviously, they're only allowed to send out the current wage bill to keep the lights on. That's all they're allowed to do. If we got 20, 25 million for one of our players, does it just go back to India and it's not allowed to be sent across? How does it work in the future? I think that's where the loan deals come in. So because Travis got out to Ipswich, we've now got a free £15,000, which Venky's can say, we're still paying that. That's still our wage bill. So we're still sending that money. Whereas with that £15,000, we can now get 3 loan players in, fill the squad up a bit more, get a bit more depth. So yeah, it's just frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine it's really frustrating. It's something that actually over the last couple of seasons, I've looked at Blackburn as an outsider, as somebody who maybe doesn't understand what you've explained today, actually, about the Venkis and the intricacies of the money they can make available. Because I was looking at the value lost, and I was looking at Ben Brereton Diaz and some of the other players that you've seen leave the club for free. And I wondered why you'd not capitalised on their value, but it almost feels as though what you're saying is, for the club, it's actually better to gamble on getting nothing in the summer if you're not going to be able to get that money anyway. It's almost better to almost suck all the value you can out of them while you've got them. And then you can see that. Do you think that is why the things like Brereton Diaz moving on for free happened? Because you just didn't see where the value was coming if you were to try and move him on?
Yes and no. I don't think any of the bids that were tabled for him were close to what we valued him at. I think the most that I'd heard in the papers like $4.5 million from Everton, which is not a lot of money for a 20-goal striker, regardless of how good of a player you think he is. when you see like people like Adam Armstrong that have left us recently with similar goal records for nearly £20 million. So the problem for me is like, how sustainable is that? Like, if you're losing your best players for free every couple of summers, like it just can't carry on long term.
No.
We need to keep the wage bill high because that's the only money allowed to send. Like the players we're loaning out now. So Travis has recently gone. Ben Brereton, I think we could like justify the transfer of Arne Sigurdsson from CSKA Moscow because he was on similar wages to between Brereton and Dak. I think that was exactly the same wages. So they've obviously gambled on losing two key players, replacing him with a similar wage level. So it's not really affected the finances. In terms of, so like Gallagher's had recent interest from Ipswich. He's a higher, and at the club, we've rejected 2 transfer bids of £2 million, and fans are like screaming out, "We need money. We need to reinvest. Why aren't we selling him at £2 million?" I think out of our last 40 competitive games, he's appeared 4 times, and I know like his win-loss ratio of 20 players is really good, but when you're paying someone £15,000 a week and they're only getting 4 games out of a full championship season, you're just not getting value. I think you're paying like something like £140,000 per appearance. It's ridiculous amount of money for a championship player. Like I say, there was
that one's you, Robert.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back there.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, so yeah, I think if he was a bit older, you'd offer him on a pay-as-you-play because you're worried about paying his wages and not being fit and whatnot. So, but the reason I think we've rejected the money from Ipswich is because we want him to go on loan and we can still have the wage bill and have the income coming over from India. Whether that suits Ipswich or not, I don't know, because they could potentially loan him for 6 months, pay his wages, and then he goes for free in the summer, not to Ipswich, whereas they might want to gamble on him now, pay 1.5, 2 million, but they've got him for the next 3-4 years.
2 final questions from me then, Robert. First one, is Jon Dahl Tomasson still going to be manager come the end of the season? And second one is, are Blackburn Rovers going to stay up?
First one, Tomasson, he will still be manager at the end of the season. But that is, well, I think he will still be manager at the end of the season, but that is completely his choice. I just don't think we have the finances to sack him.
Yeah.
I don't want him to be sacked. I think with the tools he's got on this, like the goals for this season from the CEO was to stay up, develop young players to be sold. He's done that. Every player in the squad has gone up in transfer value. Even players that when he came in, so like Joe Rankin Costello was on the fringe of the squad, was going out on loan in January, ready to be released in the summer. Now he's like one of our better players, and we've missed him so much whilst he's been injured. Again, I just think he's doing the best job possible with the tools at his disposal. He just needs a bit more backing. I think a couple more bad results might make it toxic in and around the club, but it already is a bad atmosphere. So, like, if you were a positive club, you might have changed it 6 weeks ago when you saw things going wrong. But I don't know. It's so deflating. I feel like so disassociated because he's probably the best manager that we've had for the best part of a decade, and it's just frustrating that he's going to leave without fulfilling the potential that he's got, because it's just annoying. What was the last question? Will Blackburn Rovers stay up?
Will you stay up? Yeah.
Yeah, we will stay up. Yeah,
I agree. For what it's worth, I completely agree. I think there's certainly things to be concerned about to an extent. I think what we've talked about today does continue to add that cloud and that question mark for me for next season. But yeah, I have to say I agree with that assumption, Robert. I think you'll stay up and you'll be all right, I think, for now at least.
Yeah, I think if it gets to March time and we're still like not fully fit, I'll be like, ooh. But yeah, I think we'll be all right in the end.
Hopefully so. Rob, thanks so much for your time and keep up. Hopefully catch up with you later in the season, mate.
Yeah, okay, thanks for having me on. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
See you later.
Joe, delighted to be joined by my next guest, Joe Bell from the Green and White podcast and Argyle Life on Plymouth Argyle. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. So great to get your insight. It's just been one game, I think, for Ian Foster as Argyle boss so far. Can you give us any sort of hint of the impact he's made on the club, or the impression he's made on the club?
Evening, Gav. Evening, Ollie. What sort of impact has he made? Well, we were a lot more solid away from home. That's the first thing. I was stood in that away end Saturday. It wasn't particularly warm. And when we were being penned in the second half by a team who, I do think we are better than, in the cold light of day, it was a little bit frustrating.
In the freezing cold light of day, you might say.
Yeah, you could. We had 2 or 3 really good opportunities in the first half as well at 1-0, which could have, really put the game away. But, actually, when you listen to what he said afterwards and you listen to his interview, and he says that, the plan essentially is just to make us hard to break down away. We've got to address this horrendous away form. He's not hidden away from that fact either. I'd imagine on every single one of the training sessions he had with the players last week, the presentations he did with them all started with the away form table. He said he's made no secret of telling the players it isn't good enough where we are away from home. So the first objective was always going to be, his first game was away, or his first proper game away, shall I say. The first objective was always going to be to make us hard to beat. And, I think we achieved that. Huddersfield, a lot of their sort of good chances, if you want to call them that, came from outside the box. I think they ran out of ideas very quickly, but I don't think that's anything new for them at the moment. I think they're just struggling to really find a rhythm, aren't they? But look, I mean, we know what our home form is. We know we're good at home. We can't rely on it, because you look at the teams we've been away to the first half of the season. Yes, we've been away to 8 of the top 10 or whatever it is, but those 8 are now going to have to come to Home Park. So at some point, there may have to be a flip around in fortunes. But our schedule on the road does look a lot easier second half of the season than it does at first half of the season. Obviously, that, nothing's a given in football. We all know that. But if we're going to make ourselves harder to beat away from home, we're certainly going to give ourselves a strong foundation to build on when we do return to Home Park.
Absolutely. I mean, Ollie, it feels like Argyle, if they can just sort of stabilise away from home and tick off, I think pretty much every away game, a point for Argyle is absolutely fine, because we can kind of rely on them to, on their day, just demolish teams occasionally at home, or have that sort of wonder show. But you don't want them to put too much pressure on the home games, and I think a few draws would kind of loosen things up a little bit.
Yeah, completely. I think it's one of those where, for Argyle now, they are in a very good position in terms of staying in the division, which would have been the target from the moment that they got promoted last season. It was to stay up. And, 8-point buffer to Wednesday in the third from bottom space. They've got a 4-point buffer above Huddersfield. And I think most people would agree, they've also got a way of scoring goals and winning games of football that Huddersfield haven't at the moment, that Huddersfield have struggled to have consistently. I think if they can stabilise, and I think, like Joe said there, it's about the fixtures. You can't rely on your fixtures at home when you've still got to play all of the top teams in the division. You can't guarantee that you've got Leicester at home. Oh, well, we've got good home form, so we'll win that. That's just not how it works when you flip the fixtures around. So the away form is going to be really crucial, because it's got to keep things ticking over when the sticky patch comes. I think they will be feeling very confident with the buffer they've got right now. I think, for me, the question mark for the new man coming in that he wants to do, and which you've said you saw a little bit more of, I think, at the weekend, which is great to hear, but only Rotherham have conceded more goals than Plymouth. And that, to me, is the question mark. That's where the blockers come, and that's where I really would start to think that's what you've got to address. That's job number one. Address that, and you're pretty much on a hiding to nothing now to the end of the season to keep them up. For you, Joe, though.
Just very quickly, Ollie, just jumping in on that. I totally agree. I think, you don't win games of football, but, if we went into every game of football having to score 4 to win, we probably don't deserve to stay in the Championship, do we? And to be honest, before Christmas, that was the point we were at. Even at home, we were having to score 3 just to get a point. So Ian's come in and his first aim is to make us more solid at the back. But the quirk is, although only Rotherham, I think, as you're right, are the only team who've conceded more, we still have, I think it's something stupid like a 21 goal swing on Sheffield Wednesday. So although it's 8 points, it's probably value for 1, 2, maybe even 3 points more with that goal difference. So it's just a weird quirk, and I suppose it just sums up how mad of a division the Championship is.
Yeah, it really does. And it also sums up that point that I was getting at with the comparison to Huddersfield of you also score so many. Like, in terms of the conceding, you can't afford to concede that many, but you've been able to still progress and still have really positive results for the first half of the season because of how good you've been going forward. And that's sort of where I was going to come to on that next question of how big of an impact is losing Azaz and Kundal? Because obviously today I felt like 2 really good new signings actually coming in. I think that I was really worried about Argyle a couple of weeks ago when first it came out that Azaz was leaving, Schumacher had gone, Kundal was then following Schumacher out to Stoke. I kind of thought, okay, I'm starting to notice an issue. But I did like the signings done today. So has that mitigated some of your risk? Where do you feel the club are at in terms of the squad and replacing those players?
It'd be folly for me to sit here and say that we're going to find a replacement to Finn Azaz. I think, in particular, that's one that is going to take longer than 3 weeks to find a replacement. I think that's more of a summer job than a January job. I don't think you can be anything other than excited about Alfie Devine. When you see what he did at Port Vale, when you read all the reports, I mean, you've got even people like Conte and Mourinho, their comments when he was just a 16, 17-year-old at Spurs, the things they were saying about him then. I think he's a very exciting signing. He's got a couple of sessions now to get ready and up to speed before Cardiff on Saturday. And as you say, Luke Kundal's a little bit of a different character to replace in a way because he, I came on here a couple of times and said he was just a Duracell bunny. He never stopped going from one end of the pitch to the other. And I think we saw little glimpses of that from Darko JB on Saturday. He's quite a raw talent. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. I think, he's not made many first team appearances, but there were little glimpses, particularly in the first half, where he just showed his quality on the ball. I'll go blue in the face by complaining that it was a free kick for their equaliser with a tackle on him. But anyone who listens to our podcast knows I go blue in the face about referees anyway. But he's probably more a replacement for Kundal. And obviously Devine looks not a ready-made replacement for Azaz, because as I say, I think it's going to be difficult to replace him. But he's certainly going to come in and do the Azaz job. And now all we have to do really is keep Morgan Whittaker in some secret location somewhere in the West Country for the next few weeks under lock and key. We need a bit of witness protection from Devon and Cornwall Constabulary for the next 2 weeks, I think. But I would imagine that it would take a pretty sizable bid for Argyle to even contemplate it. And my view on that is it depends how much they value on staying in the Championship. And whatever that value is the bare minimum you accept for Whittaker. I'm not sure what it says when your chief executive comes out and says the club have to keep Whittaker to stay up. I'm not sure what that says about the rest of the group. But that just shows to the wider world just how much Whittaker means to this team going forward, I think.
Yeah.
Certainly does. Do you know what? I actually think Luke Kundal's going to be just as hard to replace as Finn Azaz, because I think while Finn Azaz is absolutely box office and he's such an exciting... I know that's a bit of a hot take from me, Ollie. He's such an exciting player. Just give me a moment while I, unpack my madness. He's such an exciting player that can come up with moments of genius, but he's also a bit of a risk taker as well. Whereas I think what you get with Luke Kundal is he's more of a high volume passer, and I think he's one who sort of knits the play together and he makes Argyle's style work, because Jordan Houghton, although he's having a good season, he's not super technical, I don't think. Whereas Luke Kundal is that one, who is that player who can drop in and link play in a different way, whereas Azaz is more your high stakes player. So I think Kundal's going to take some replacing, but hopefully Diaby can do it if he can build on what Jay mentioned at Huddersfield.
It's not too far wrong, Gab, because as I say, Luke Kundal brought so much to the team. in terms of work rate, energy, as you say, the ability on the ball. And, you know, it's obviously early days for JB, and for him, really, this is just a development loan. I think, obviously we would expect as a fan base that we're going to get at least one more in that position this window, just to really rubber stamp it. I know we've got Randall as well, but you don't want to be putting too much pressure on one 21-year-old and a 19-year-old to run the show in midfield. So I would certainly think at least one more will come in a similar mold to JB. But you don't have to be a NASA rocket scientist to work out the types of players that we're going to be bringing in this transfer window, I don't think.
Yeah. Do you think Ian Foster's background with the England youth setup is going to be an advantage in terms of recruitment, like we've already seen with Alfie Devine?
Yeah, I mean, the three deals we've got in, we've got Alfie Devine, Darko JB, and Ashley Phillips. I mean, we've got
Matthew Soranola's just been confirmed as well,
and Soranola as well. So I mean, there's all three of them. Certainly, all three of the loan signings will have been in Foster's England pathway in very quick time. Obviously, he'll be fully aware of Soranola. He'll have been through the pathway with him as well. He's mentioned that, he's Lewis Gibson was in his pathway, Morgan Whittaker was in his pathway. He's got players there, and I think that's key, Gab. It's very rare, I think, that a manager comes into a situation like Fozzie found himself in coming into us, where immediately, although it's a negative that we lost Cundall, Azaz, Warrington, Kessler, Heyn, and Tyreek Wright's gone out on loan, it's also giving him the opportunity immediately to mould his squad. He's got 5 loan facilities available to him. All 5 will be used this month. So immediately he can bring in 5 loan players that he wants, that he knows he can hit the ground running with. He's brought in Soranola. I wouldn't be too surprised if there's at least 1 or 2 more who come in. I know there's not a great amount of wiggle room in the budget because of the dual signing of Whittaker and Mumba in the summer. But it's rare that a manager gets such an opportunity so quickly. And, just from the 2 lads that we saw at the weekend, I mean, Phillips was probably the more impressive out of the two. But if Devine can come in and hit the ground running on Saturday against Cardiff, and Phillips can back up what he did this week, I mean, whoever he brings in, he's going to have the full support. And, as I said, when we touched on the Schumacher departure, there's a lot of good people that are still at this football club, and a lot of people who have put in a lot of hard work in the last 18 months, 2 years. Yes, Schumacher's job was incredible, but you've still got Jimmy Dickinson, you've still got Ross Goodwin, you've still got Sam Morecambe, the analyst, you've still got Neil Dewsnip, Kevin Nanscoville's still there, who holds the place together, essentially. So there's still a lot of... And Andrew Parkinson is a very underrated member of the board as well, with the work that he does. So, the foundations are still in place. Yes, we've lost a few of the pillars of the building, but certainly the foundations are still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I don't know how good a coach Ian Foster's going to be, because we've not seen enough evidence of that as a number one yet. But what makes me feel more confident about it, even though the Championship is a tough opening gig, is that he is coming into such a solid structure for the reasons that you've mentioned, Joe. So I think that's great. Crunch question, really. Are Argyle staying up?
Are we going to stay up? Yeah, of course we are, Gab. I'd be lynched. I'd never be allowed back on the podcast if I came here and said, no, we're going to be pipped by Wednesday to that final place. I think, we've got a lot of points in the bag already, and I don't want us to rest on our laurels by the fact that we're already on 30 points, but to get to 30 points by this stage is a very good foundation to build on. Now we've got, 17 games left. If you read all these points per game profits and things that you see, 19 games left. If you read all these points per game profits that you see on social media and on all these websites and things, it's not going to take an astronomically high number in the 40s to keep you in the division. So we're on 30. Look, a minimum of 4 wins. Throw in 4 or 5 draws in there, which we're more than capable of.
Mm.
And that may well be enough. The quicker we can get to 40 points, the better, because I think that will settle everyone down a little bit. And then it's just a case of getting as close to 50 as you can. They still hold on to the fact that 52, no club's ever been relegated with 52. So that's their target. But look,
Hang
they're
on,
ambitious.
weren't Peterborough relegated with 53 or something in
Neil Jewsnip's gone on record saying no team's gone down with 52, Gab. So you can,
2012.
if you're willing to challenging him on that.
I'm furious. I'm not sure that's correct.
But either way, I mean, look, 4 or 5 wins, throw in a couple of draws in there. The important thing to calm everyone down is to get an away win quickly. We've got, if I look at the next couple of away games in February, we've got to go to Swansea and Sunderland in the first 2 weeks of the month. Both clubs aren't, I mean, I know Sunderland have got the new manager, but I've seen them play a couple of times. I don't think they're playing particularly great under Michael Beale. I think they're there for the taking at the moment. Swansea are obviously in transition as well. So get a win on Saturday, settle everyone down. I mean, we've only lost twice since the defeat at Coventry at the end of November. We're drawing a lot, but we're also not exactly easy to beat at the moment. And those 2 defeats came away at Leicester and Southampton. So on that, if we can make, I think we're allowed passes. And let's be fair, we had a perfectly good goal disallowed against Southampton as well. So if we can make ourselves harder to beat away, which we've shown early signs of, then, as I keep saying, we've got a good foundation to build on, and we can't rely on the home form. But look, Home Park's been a pretty horrible place to come now for nearly 3 seasons. So let's hope that continues with some of these. Some of these big boys might not like the smell of pasties when they get off their coach outside the stadium. So
absolutely. By the way, it's 55 points that you've got to get to, because Peterborough went down with 54 in 12-13. So there you go.
I demand that Neil Jewsnip goes in front of the local media tomorrow and makes a formal apology.
Come on, Neil. I thought you had a bit of sense about you. Listen, Jay, thanks so much. Absolutely love the Green and White podcast. So thanks for joining us. And keep up the great work. Cheers, mate.
Yeah. Always a pleasure, Joe. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, gents.
Cheers, pal. Delighted to be joined by Dan Sexton from Millwall. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Really curious to get your views on the Lions, because I suppose, having won 3 of your last 4, you might take some offence to coming on a podcast titled Potential Plummeters, and maybe as a Millwall fan, you're looking a bit more towards mid-table. What is the sort of feeling in the fan base at the moment?
I think generally the feeling's quite happy, to be honest. I think when you obviously 3 wins in the last 4, that was really good. And the performance against Leicester in the FA Cup and the performance of the first half against Middlesbrough on the whole were really good. And you can see the difference that Joe Edwards is starting to make. The players are starting to play with a lot more confidence when they're on the ball. We're starting to play a lot better. So there's definitely more positives than negatives at the moment. So it definitely feels like we can be looking more towards mid-table than looking over our shoulder. And I think that run of form over the festive period got that much needed win against QPR, clean sheet, and the momentum just kind of carried us through them Norwich and Bristol City games. So yeah, I think with a couple of additions this window, still waiting for Mill to get their first bit of business over the line. Hopefully there'll be something in before the big game against QPR at the weekend.
What does the Joe Edwards team look and feel like on early evidence, Dan?
We're definitely a bit trying to play around with the ball a bit more. I wouldn't go as far as saying we're possession based, but rather than trying to get the ball as forward as quickly as possible, which were the themes under Gary Rowett and Neil Harris, there seems to be a bit more composure on the ball. I think having Ryan Leonard was very key to that when he was in the team. He's now out injured, but I thought Danny McNamara actually had a very good game at centre half, position he'd never played before, and did the role very similar to Ryan Leonard. I think you can see Jake Cooper's also been told to take a bit more time when he's on the ball. And although Joe Bryan had a bit of a shaky game defensively, you can tell the qualities he brings to the team, particularly when we attack. So I think
that was a lovely goal against Middlesbrough, by the way. I didn't
it was a
his
great
right foot
goal.
was that good, actually. So.
No, I don't think any of us did. So Brian on his day, I think he's one of the best left backs in the league, but he's injured too often, and unfortunately, he kind of let himself down with Middlesbrough's second goal at the weekend, where he pretty much put it on the plate for Isaiah Jones. So.
What do you think you are going to need in January then, Dan?
It sounds like we're going to be chasing a centre half. That seems to be the two main players we've been linked with so far have been Charlie Cresswell, who obviously we had on loan last season, a real fan favourite. I really like him, but I just think I don't know whether, considering we spent a lot of money by our stands in the summer, whether that's going to be a realistic deal, because it sounds like Leeds want to get rid of him on a permanent basis. I don't know whether that's something we're quite going to be able to pull off this window. We've also been looking at Alfie Gilchrist on loan from Chelsea, the centre half. Obviously Joe Edwards and Andy Myers, they'll be using their contacts there to try and get that deal over the line. I think, to be honest, centre midfield is an area where we're well stocked. So I'd probably be looking at striker and probably a couple of wingers, to be honest. Joe Edwards seems to be keen on having some pace and play and getting the ball out wide where he can. Brooke Norton-Cuffy is obviously a very key asset to that, and we saw a little bit of a first team breakthrough for Idemaya Maku around the festive period as well. He's been out injured as well. So if we can get them two back and maybe add a little bit more in them areas to kind of strengthen us a little bit, then I think that'll be okay. And another striker, really, because Tom Bradshaw seems to be Joe Edwards' number one choice, but he's out injured at the minute as well. And Kevin Nisbet, he's just struggling a little bit. It might be he gets a goal at the weekend and he'll hit a run of form. But I feel like we could do with another striker to add a bit more competition as well.
Let's hope you can get the right ones in. Oli, 10, 20 years ago, managers tended to be appointed based on their sort of track record, whereas now we've just spoken to a Plymouth Argyle fan about the appointment of Ian Foster. He's a first-time head coach. It's the same with Joe Edwards at Millwall. Do you think that coaching reputation has become a more important facet in the way clubs appoint managers?
I think... Sent me a 8-ball there, ain't you, Gav? Try and knock that one in. Here you go. He's a bounce pass all. Try and take this one with centre forward chasing you down. Yes, I do, Gav, to be honest. And I think we've seen a massive change in culture around football as well over the last 10 years that's gone alongside that. I think as we've seen the development of data analysis and more sort of, I don't want to call it intellectual thinking about football, but you know what I mean. And I'm sure that as that develops, we'll start to see us find our way back, and we'll end up back with experience again, and then it'll come round in cycles. But I think the success of managers like Steve Cooper coming through, for example, managers like Graham Potter, what they've done and the way that they came into their clubs and really sort of transformed it without having that extensive background, and mainly were experienced as coaches and had worked a lot in the England setup, for example, that does seem to be carrying a lot more weight with clubs at the moment. And I think the impact we're seeing from these coaches as well will only serve to really sort of encourage that more. And I do think we will start to see more and more clubs going down that route. I think as well, we can't ignore the impact of finance in football at the moment. And I think particularly in the Championship, there's so much in terms of the financial risks and issues that clubs are finding themselves in, that recruiting a first-time coach based on really outstanding coaching credentials does give you a risk, but it's also a relatively low-value risk. You can still go and get Neil Warnock in a couple of months if everything goes wrong. You'll probably be fine. And so you've got that opportunity. So clubs are a lot more patient, a lot more willing to give that. And I do think there's just been a massive shift in the entire culture of the game around that.
Dan, I stereotypically, I suppose, think of Millwall as quite a traditional club with a fan base. I don't want to say old-fashioned, but not old-fashioned in terms of the fan base. You can tell me if I'm wrong about that. But I'm curious to hear about how the Joe Edwards style of football has sort of been received by the fan base, because I can imagine, again, a little bit of a stereotype here, that maybe there's parts of the fan base that would like to see a bit more of the up and atom football, where it's early balls to a target man and the sort of the aggressive high press. Do you think there's a part of the fan base that want, that actually really appeals something different, that they really like that? And do you think there's part of the fan base that would maybe prefer the more traditional approach?
I think there's definitely elements of both of that in the fan base right now. I think a lot more people, obviously, football is a results business at the end of the day, isn't it? And I think them results over that festive period kind of warmed a lot more people to Joe Edwards and what he was trying to do, because you could really see in them games what he was trying to do. So people have warmed to it a lot more. Obviously, when you're 2-1 down in a home game with 5 minutes to go and you're still passing the ball round the back, then obviously you're going to have the majority of fans on your back, because we're going to want to get the ball forward. You don't want to be losing the game 2-1 and have it pretty much on the edge of your own box, just playing it among your centre halves. But I think fans are definitely warming to it, and I think there's always probably going to be pockets of fans that are always going to want to play a different style of football. I think they can do a better job than the manager.
I think that was the question I wanted to ask Gab, but I wasn't sure I was, emotionally ready to ask it in this kind of format. But it's similar, because I have seen the same at Sheffield United. We've had managers come in to change to a more possession-based style, and it does feel as though there is a generational divide in how the fans respond to that. I know my dad won't mind me saying that if we sit next to each other, I'll be like, "Oh, it's patient play. They're doing well." My dad will be like, "Get it forward. What are you doing?" It's nice to know that it's not just us that have that experience. One of the things I'm
and then in
though,
30 years' time, Ollie, your kids will be like, "Oh, we're playing some nice stuff here," and you're like, "No,
run about." You've got to do the fundamentals, guys. I think one of the things for me is this sort of new style and the sort of transition style of play that you're now looking at. You're going to be a bit more patient, hold the ball. Do you think that is going to allow you to get the most out of players like Zion Fleming, obviously, who was so impressive last season and doesn't seem to have really hit those heights again this year? Obviously, transfer rumours in the summer maybe disrupted him a little bit. Do you think this change will allow him to flourish again and maybe get the most out of his game?
He has struggled a little bit so far, if I'm being completely honest. He has been someone who maybe, if Edwards is trying to look to change the game with kind of 25, 20 minutes to go, sometimes Fleming has been the man who's made way. If, like, for example, at the weekend, he was taken off after the 70th minute for Brooke Norton-Cuffey. So I think he's been getting better in the system. But Edwards seems to like pacey, direct, quick players, forward thinking. I'm not, while Fleming's got his qualities, I'm not 100% sure that's his main quality, but he's just got that, sometimes them little bits of individual quality that other players won't give you. So I think in that respect, if we are still a little bit worried about relegation, I think he's someone that the club has to definitely keep to the end of the season, even if it maybe does mean his value decreases slightly. But he still had a good season under his belt last season, and he's still actually one of our top goal scorers this season, despite not hitting the same numbers. So I still think the club will still be in a decent position to get a good fee for him come the summer if they were to choose to cash in on him then.
Makes a lot of sense. Dan, who do you think are the players that Joe Edwards will feel like he can build around, maybe going into next season? I would imagine you'd put Jake Cooper and Billy Mitchell into that bracket.
Mitchell's someone who's definitely had a renaissance recently, getting his chance because of injuries and suspensions. And I think he's played quite well in the games and probably given Edwards a little bit of a positive selection headache. Same as well, George Honeyman as well. I think our centre midfield department recently has been really good, and now we're able to add Casper Denor and George Saville back into the mix for the game against QPR at the weekend. So he's definitely going to have some positive selection headaches. I think, to be honest, with the way the squad's going, I think we're going to be in for kind of a massive kind of reshape, to be completely honest.
Oh, really?
We have quite an aging squad. A lot of players are coming up to the end of their contracts either this season or next season. But I think someone who's going to be quite key to him is Casper Denor. You can tell he's a class above probably what we have. I have just spoke about midfielders, but I do think he is our best midfielder, to be completely honest.
Really?
Yeah, and I think Idemaya Maku as well. He's just recently signed a new long-term contract with the club. Apparently, had interest from Atletico Madrid, and he's chosen to commit his future to Millwall. So it sounds like quite a coup for us. So I think there's definitely going to be someone who's probably going to be in the long-term planning of Joe Edwards. So I think them two, but we have quite an aging squad. I'm not entirely sure. I think this is probably the first time Jake Cooper's probably ever been told to try and pass the ball like 5-10 yards, to be completely honest.
Well, do you know what, though? I saw against Middlesbrough, there was one pass. I think it was literally right before the final whistle, but Jake Cooper played this lovely sort of long-range diagonal pass, which I don't know, maybe I've underestimated Jake Cooper previously, but it looks like he's kind of has been encouraged to show a bit more of what he's about technically under Joe Edwards.
I mean, he's not a bad. You wouldn't assume he's a bad technical player because he's
No.
came through Reading's academy, and Reading obviously have a good track record of bringing through some good, talented young footballers who are decent with the ball. So I do think he's got that potential in him. But the one thing he's always been good at has always been that good diagonal, the switch, the ping. When it was Harris, it was always get that diagonal straight onto Morrison's head, knock it down for Gregory, and get it in the back of the net. So he's always had that potential in him. So it's just the little bits of, can he get the ball into whoever's playing in front of him in the midfield rather than just getting his head up and pumping it long up for Bradshaw Nisbet or going for the switch. But obviously there is times, like you just mentioned then, there was a couple of times where he played the switch and it worked out really well at the weekend.
For sure. Any of the out of contract players that you mentioned there, Dan, that you'll be keen to renew?
I think Bradshaw's probably one. He's another one that's out injured at the moment. We've got quite an extensive injury list at the moment, which I don't think is helping. But I think he's going to be one. I think Edwards really likes him for his work rate, so he's a very popular player. I think even if he's not going to be our first choice, I think just having him in the squad's an asset. You want someone like Tom Bradshaw in your squad rather than in someone else's, just because of the work rate, and he does pop up with some important goals. He hit a bit of a run of form over the festive period. And obviously 17 goals last season. While I don't think he'll get close to that again this season, he could probably get into the double digits again. So I think he's going to be someone that the club will probably look to extend. And if Ryan Leonard can get through the second half of the season pretty much injury free, I would imagine he'll be another player who will get a contract extension, because he's been very, very good so far. Probably written off by a lot of the fans when he got given his extension in the summer due to his injury record, but I think he's been immense so far this season. He'd probably be in my either first or second if I had to pick my player of the season now.
Right. Confident you'll get into mid-table then, Dan. Sounds like you seem pretty hopeful that even with some of the injuries that you've mentioned, that Millwall are going to be a class above those teams fighting down the bottom.
Yeah, I don't want to be it can always come back to bite you on the bum. I don't want to be too disrespectful to like the bottom four teams, but I do look at their squads on paper and look at ours and think there is a significant gap in the quality. And when the Joe Edwards appointment was being made, in my head, it was a little bit like what Oli said earlier. Actually, I was a bit like, look, I kind of want us to go down this route and try something different, because if it doesn't work in February or March, you can go and get Neil Warnock or go and get another one of these experienced heads out of retirement to come and save your season, be that firefighter if you need them
Ian
to be.
Holloway's available, Dan.
I think I'll pass on that one, mate. Thank you. So yeah, I'm very happy with how things are going, and I think once we can get some more players in that will suit your style of play, I'm not really worried at all, to be completely honest. But as I said, that could easily come back and bite me on the bum. This league's bonkers. We was quite close to relegation zone, had a good run of form over Christmas, and now have managed to put a decent bit of breathing space between us and the relegation zone. But that could go the other way. We could have a bad form and be back in there. But one thing that's always been Millwall that I've known since I've been going in the 16 odd years is that we always have a very strong second half of the season, usually much stronger than the first half of the season. I don't know what it is. We just always do. So that's another reason why I'm not overly panicked.
Wow, it's good to know. Dan, thanks so much for your time, and hopefully catch up with you later in the season.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me on, Gab. Cheers, Ollie. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Ollie, before we finish off this evening, I just wanted to have a quick chat about Blues, because we're obviously one of the teams closest to the Huddersfield and Sheffield Wednesday group. We've appointed Tony Mowbray, and in his 2-2 draw to start with Swansea. I think a draw was about right in that one. And then in his second game in charge last night, the 2-1 FA Cup win over Hull, the team looked a lot more like the side that was sort of flying under John Eustace in terms of the energy that we were playing with, the way that we pressed them back and sort of sustained pressure. And it feels like a bit of a relief, because you're watching Blues at the moment and it feels a little bit more like you can recognise the side that was that was flying under John Eustace. And I from my point of view, I feel quite hopeful that results are going to stabilise for us. Do you share that confidence?
I think so. I like the appointment. I think it's a really sensible change. I think, obviously, we had what happened, and it was a similar situation that all Birmingham fans have seen before, and it's led into that real concern that actually it felt as though there was this decline ongoing with Birmingham. You know, the start of January in particular, there were rumours, obviously, of some of the players moving on. Rooney was still in charge at the time, and you did just start to get this wider feeling of they're just going to sleepwalk themselves really into this relegation zone and this relegation conversation. I didn't have much confidence, if I'm being honest, in the managerial appointment. I didn't know who you were going to get. There were obviously big players like Frank Lampard being mentioned, and I thought they're in trouble here, Birmingham, because I just don't know how they're going to do this. But I really like that they went and got Mowbray. I think he's a really sensible option. And I think, like you've said, he's the man who's going to allow them to stabilise and actually get some results. And I do think that he's, of the options available, a really strong one to take them forward and get better. But from your perspective then, Gab, under Mowbray, are we going to see this no fear football? Is that what we're expecting? Or how is he going to take you?
It feels, I feel like we're certainly playing no fear football now that we were before we started talking about no fear football. So that's nice. I'm really excited about Ramel Donovan. He's a really exciting teenage, versatile wide player. I think he's come into the side and looks really good. And even with a sort of rotated squad with players like Donovan and Keshi Anderson, who you'd traditionally consider sort of being on the fringes, you could see some of the identity coming back, and we're not sort of the finished project by any means. You wouldn't expect us to be, but I think we're getting a lot closer to the sort of levels we were producing earlier in the season, and I'm pretty hopeful that we can stabilise and with the right additions. Just hope we can keep hold of Jay Stansfield as well.
Yeah, that's the big one for me, because he was obviously one of the players rumoured to maybe be moving. I think they said he might end up at Ipswich, but him still being there feels like a really big sign of intent that actually, if he's still there now, he will likely see out January and the season with Blues, and that'll make a big difference. A player that I've always liked, Gab, and I want you to talk to me about, Christian Bielik. He obviously, for a long time, has been in teams towards the bottom end of the Championship, and he's always felt as though a player that I always looked at and thought he's going to step up. He's a great player. He'll go somewhere, then he'd get injured, and then you'd have the same cycle where you were thinking he's going to be really good, he's going to get a big move, then he'd get injured and he'd really struggle again. It seems as though he's overcome some of his injury issues this season, but maybe not quite hit the heights that we'd seen from him in the past. How is he doing? What's his role in this current Birmingham side?
Yeah, it's funny because when you talk to Swansea fans about Christian Bielik, not Swansea fans, Derby fans even.
Derby fans.
Right. They were saying when he was fit in the first half of, I want to say the 2021 season, might be the season before actually, he was the best player in the league when he was fit. And so that's kind of what he's capable of. I think he's a very assured defensive midfielder with good positional sense. But I think he's had a few long-term injuries since then, and getting back to those sorts of levels is going to be tough. But I'm quite hopeful that in a Tony Mowbray team, he can be the one sort of sweeping up from the base of midfield and ticking the play over and just putting out fires here and there. Obviously, he'll need energy alongside him. So in the 2-2 draw with Swansea, he had Ivan Sunic, who was very much a ball winner type. And probably a little bit more athletic and going to get around the pitch. So I think it's important that you have legs around Christian Bielik. I do quite like the idea actually of having maybe Jordan James as the number 10, because he's very much a pressing 10 as well. So that you've got Bielik kind of in that sweeping role, if you like, because he's got such an intelligent figure, but you've also got the legs around him, and I think that balance could work really nicely.
Yeah, and you mentioned him there, Jordan James. Overall, very clearly, Rooney's time as Birmingham manager didn't go well, was a little bit of a failure. But would you say the one shining light of his time in charge of Birmingham is Jordan James and the game time and the contribution that he was able to make?
I think so, yeah. I possibly would have liked to have seen him start more often, but definitely if we want to play on the front foot, his aggression against the ball, he plays a little bit like a fan on the pitch, if you like, Ollie, because he does run around with a lot of energy. And I think if you can channel that correctly, and I think Tony Mowbray's guidance, to be fair, because he's such an experienced manager who knows to handle different people in different ways, I'd be hopeful that we can sort of channel Jordan James his energy into the right way. And if he can add the nuances of pressing and the intelligence of that, I think we could have a really exciting player on our hands. So I'm kind of quite hopeful that Mowbray is going to be what we need for the next 18 months, just to sort of stay up this season and hopefully next year just stabilise in mid-table, because sometimes you need that bridge season to go from being a side that's battled relegation for much of the last 10 years. You need a year or two to stabilise in mid-table under someone like Mowbray before you start making the right decisions, and eventually that can manifest itself in a more of a playoff and promotion push. But yeah, I'm excited by what we've got going forward.
Good. I love that. So, final two questions then. One of them I think you've already touched on, but we'll come to that one. Second, January, obviously, big deal with the ownership. It was fantastic getting them in. Had quite a big summer and obviously have taken a few interesting decisions so far. Are you expecting anything from them in the next couple of weeks of January? Do you think there'll be movement, recruitment, or do you think they're going to save their funds to go again in the summer?
Well, I think we have got a lot of work ahead of us in the summer, because there's a lot of players out of contract, which I think is quite a nice sort of opportunity for us to sort of hit the reset button a little bit. But yeah, I think in terms of January, I think if we can keep our fullbacks fit, then that back four of Cody Dramé, Dion Sanderson, Kevin Long and Lee Buchanan, I think that's a very strong quartet with John Ruddy in goal that in the first 3 months of the season were very solid. I think we kept a lot of clean sheets under John Eustace. So yeah, I actually don't look at our side and think we need loads here. To be honest, the one thing I would say would be a centre forward who's can provide a little bit of the hold-up play, but is also mobile, because we've got Scott Hogan, who can't really hold the ball up very well, and we've got Lucas Jukovic, who's not mobile at all.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a... And you know what? That's been a frustration for us probably since we had Che Adams, who had a little bit of physicality, but also had that bit of pace. And then since then, that's been a real issue. And having Stansfield has been great, because he's got that ability to sort of get in behind and offer that sort of threat. But someone that's a little bit mobile, not necessarily rapid, quick, but can sort of can get about the pitch, but also has the hold-up play. I think that's the big one. So if we could get the right centre forward in, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, so it's funny. So we talked to Millwall and they thought they're going to stay up. And in terms of recruitment, they were probably looking in different areas. Blackburn, they're going to stay up, but maybe potentially might look at trying to get a striker if they get the opportunity. Plymouth, they're definitely going to stay up. And they maybe will just look around what the options are, might pick up a striker. Birmingham might pick up a striker. It's the one area that they need. Are they going to stay up?
Yes, I do think we'll stay up. So I'm glad we've had this conversation, because we've established that the four teams that we've talked about are all going to stay up. So there's very little in the way of fallout from this conversation. But I think what we can conclude is that it's going to be... I think it's looking increasingly like a shootout between Huddersfield and Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, and I do as well. That's exactly the feeling that I'm getting. You're looking at the gap. You're looking at the teams improving as well that are just above that cluster. And it does look as though it's a straight shootout for that third relegation spot between Wednesday and Huddersfield. Like I say, for me, I think by the end of, I think it's three games. Once Huddersfield have played their next three, I think it's Blackburn, QPR and Wednesday. Once those three have been done, we'll probably be able to give a pretty confident answer about which way it's going, because if Huddersfield get 6 to 9 points, they'll have something of a gap. It'll be a minimum 4 points. I would expect it to extend to more like 6 if they manage to get that sort of return. If they don't, and if they play what on paper are three of the easier games they've got left, QPR away at the moment looks like it's probably the easiest game in the league. They've got Wednesday at home, which if you're going to stay up, they've got to win that. If they don't win those games, if it's still 4 points or less after those three games, I just don't see how they keep Wednesday away from them, to be honest, with the form and the improvement that they've shown. So it's down to 4 is what we've figured out. I've already written 2 off, which means there's one place and one argument left to have. And I'm sure we all can't wait to see what happens. I've certainly got a horse in the race. I know I want to get relegated. I think most people can guess.
Absolutely. Well, I think if there's one thing we know about the Championship, it's that it's very straightforward and always goes exactly the way that we prophesise. So
easy to predict, to be
yeah,
honest.
I think
always
it's
thought
just going to
that.
be. I think it's just going to be very straightforward, Ollie, between now and the end of the season.
Nailed it.
Listen, thanks so much for your insight, Ollie, as co-host. Really appreciate your time, mate. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to all our guests. This has been the EFL Debate Championship podcast. We'll see you again next week.